Thanks, Gavin. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Our speaker today is Zoe Yujnovich, who is Chairman of Shell Australia Proprietary Limited and Executive Vice President of that company in Australia and New Zealand. She was appointed to those roles in February of 2017. Zoe is an engineer who has worked in various roles in Australia, the USA, UK, Brazil and Canada. While at Rio Tinto, Zoe held several senior leadership positions, including company president in Brazil and president and CEO of the Iron Ore Company of Canada. Zoe joined Shell in 2014, leading Shell's oil sands business in Canada. During that time, she was also a non-executive director of the Potash Corporation of Saskatchewan. In her current role, she has responsibility for managing the company's portfolio of LNG projects in Australia, which include QGC, the world's first coalbed methane to LNG project, Prelude, the company's first deployment of floating LNG technology, development of the world-class Arrow resource, and managing their non-operated venture interests in Gorgon, North West Shelf and other investments. Zoe is a board member of the West Coast Eagles Football Club, University of WA Business School and Christchurch Grammar School. She's also chairman of APIA, Australia's National Oil and Gas Industry Association. Members and guests, can you please welcome Zoe Yujnovich? Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. If I could also start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and to pay my respects to the elders both past, present and future. I'd also like to acknowledge the Minister for Regional Development and Agriculture, Jacqueline Symes, and to all of you who have joined us here today. Thank you for the warm welcome, and it's wonderful to be here in Melbourne, home of the AFL, and dare I say, where my team, the Eagles, came away as victors in last year's grand final. But right now, September does seem like a long time ago. Reflecting on what was achieved that day, I feel that there are many lessons that are just as applicable to the corporate environment as they are on the sports oval. The sporting clubs that are successful are the ones that are professional, that hold both their administration and their players to a standard that is above that which was once expected of them. And clearly corporate life is the same. We work in these complex businesses with joint venture relationships over multiple decades, and lots of unexpected things can happen around us. The consequences of recent royal commissions help to focus the mind on the importance that business and community leaders play in creating the right culture in their organisations. In Shell, we often say we need to do the right thing, especially when we think no one is watching, because clearly everyone is always watching. This is the case in ethics, this is the case in safety, this is the case in environment. The greatest challenge comes not only in how we act today, but in acting today in a way that society will judge us in decades to come. This is something we spend a lot of time thinking about to ensure our performance is delivered in a way that protects the reputation and the brand that we are the custodians of. As I turn to my day job, we have these sporting parallels within Shell Australia: performance, passion, and persistence. In terms of performance, we've reshaped our business in Australia over the past decade. Indeed, as we have done since first entering Australia 117 years ago. From 2014 to 2016, we divested our downstream fuels business, selling our 800 service stations, 30 terminals, the Geelong refinery and our aviation fuels business to a consortium headed by Europe's Vitol Group, now a listed entity, Viva Energy Australia. Due to a brand licensing and proprietary technology agreement, these are still the businesses that we're best known for when people think of Shell, even though we're no longer the operator. In 2016, we also completed the global acquisition of BG, which brought with it the world's first coal seam gas to liquefied natural gas plant, QGC. In terms of performance, QGC is a world-class operation. To give you a sense of scale, QGC's upstream operations cover an area the size of Belgium. The mind just boggles. QGC is the largest single contributor of LNG in Shell's global portfolio. In another important milestone, we established Shell Energy Australia in 2017, in part to improve competition into the East Coast gas market. As a company that's supplied energy to Australian customers for more than a century, we understand the importance of evolving our business to market changes and adapting to customer needs. While our business remains focused on producing gas and LNG, Shell Energy is considering how it can supply the products and services Australian customers want. The energy transition will fundamentally change the energy Australians need and want, and we see great opportunities to bring compelling offers to market. Our recent establishment of power trading in the Australian market reflects the fact that electrons are likely to play an increasingly larger role through the energy transition. In terms of passion, we're enthusiastic about the potential in our portfolio for a new energy project. On the drawing board are well-advanced plans for our first solar project, a 120 megawatt solar plant consisting of about 400,000 panels. It's slated to be located on the land of our QGC onshore natural gas business near Wandoan in the Darling Downs of Queensland. The solar project, if we greenlight it, would help bring down the emissions footprint of our onshore gas production at QGC. The solar project concept supports our global pledge to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from our own operations. Really, that's something we're helping our overseas customers with today through Shell's existing relationship with companies such as Sonnen, headquartered in Germany. Sonnen is a solar energy firm that is making significant inroads into residential intelligent battery systems overseas. Indeed, Sonnen has already established more than 3,000 battery systems here in Australia and has plans for growing their business here. And thirdly, in terms of persistence, our most ambitious new project in Australia is Prelude, located off the coast of northern Western Australia. Prelude is the first of its kind, floating LNG facility that extracts natural gas from beneath the seabed and liquefies it, offloading to LNG on carriers that dock alongside it. As an engineer, Prelude is quite the engineering marvel, and I was fortunate enough to have the ability to visit the facility again just 2 weeks ago. And for those of you familiar with the size of the MCG, Prelude in its length is 3 MCG ovals long. And it allows us to develop natural gas 450 kilometres off the coast of Broome. In the 1980s, the North West Shelf venture partners popularised the phrase, the loneliest gas in the world. Well, Prelude makes the North West Shelf look like as remote as Richmond. Prelude is a facility that for the first time on this scale will float over the gas field, and it's doing this in one of the most remote locations of any resource project on Earth. It might be simple in concept, but it is complex in execution. Our Prelude teams are working around the clock in an involved commissioning process. We've accomplished some amazing critical milestones. We introduced gas into the pipes in the third quarter of last year. In late December, we opened up the wells to carry the first flows from the seafloor to Prelude floating above. We're certainly not rushing the process. We're taking the time to do this safely and to remain in control in every step. Prelude is a multi-decade facility, and while we all find the near-term milestones exciting, the success of Prelude will clearly be measured in delivering sustained performance over a much longer time horizon. So we'll be keeping you abreast of its achievements. So that's a snapshot of where we are right now. I've mentioned a few decisions that we're due to make, but there are plenty of others. And as I'm sure you can appreciate, these decisions are not made in a vacuum. Inside Shell, we're guided by an overarching purpose to power progress together by providing more and cleaner energy. Our three strategies to achieve this are firstly, to be a world-class investment case. Secondly, to thrive through the energy transition as the system heads towards a low-carbon future. And thirdly, to maintain a strong licence to operate. So these are the factors that we consider in making investment decisions. Our potential investments must pass these criteria. But there are significant external factors involved too. Our big investment decisions are influenced by a multitude of tension points. I'll talk about three of them: economic, political, and societal. I'd like to spend a few moments exploring these because they affect not only Shell, but all the investment decisions that many of us in the room here today will make. So to start, let's take the economic tensions that affect investment. In the eyes of visitors, Australia is the lucky country where its citizens live a relaxed, carefree existence under the sun. Beaches, barbecues, and hopefully beating sporting opponents. Australia is enjoying the benefits of 28 years of consecutive economic growth, thanks to 30 years or more of economic reforms by successive governments. From Whitlam tariff cuts in 1973 to the wave of economic reforms under Hawke and Keating, taxation reforms under Howard and Costello, to recent free trade deals. The undeniable fact is that we are a nation built on exports and open markets. We're a nation that rode the sheep's back, fed the empire with our grain, and supplied the ore that has been the backbone of the Asian economic miracle. Removing trade barriers grows the size of the market on which we can sell our products. Why would we want to limit our horizons to a 1.8 trillion domestic market when there is a 110 trillion global economy right on our doorstep? And at every step, Australians have been the real winners: workers, families, communities. After all, 1 in 5 Australians, that's more than 2 million people, are employed in trade-related activity. A bigger economy, more jobs, and higher wages generates additional tax revenue, meaning the entire community benefits. Australia's economic reforms have delivered unprecedented levels of wealth and material progress to people's lives. It's easy to see the large houses, the big internet TVs, and big cars. Despite this, not everybody in Australia feels like a winner. Charities say people are struggling to make ends meet, even in an economy where unemployment is at historic lows of around 5%, a level that both major parties have described as full employment. Cost of living pressures are mounting while wages stagnate. People are increasingly worried by casualisation of the workforce, job insecurity, and how they will survive in retirement. The cost of housing has escalated dramatically over the past decade, whereas renters or homeowners saddled with huge mortgages. Easy personal credit over the past 2 decades has seen personal debt soar. Combined, these factors leave people under a mountain of debt and straining to make ends meet. So I can understand that people wince when they see their energy bills. I have heard and I've read the demands for government intervention. I have heard and read the demands to halt gas exports. But blaming the increase in the price of gas on exports is wrong and can't go unchallenged. Yes, it is true that gas in Eastern Australia is more expensive today than it was a decade ago. The fact is that Eastern Australia, for many years, benefited from cheap gas. It was a byproduct to oil production in the Bass Strait and the onshore oil fields in South Australia's Cooper Basin. The oil paid for development costs and underpinned infrastructure overheads. But today, the cheap gas is almost gone. New developments in Bass Strait and the Cooper are deeper and harder to extract, making them more expensive. And unlike the developments of the 60s and 70s, there is less oil to underpin the development costs. Take Queensland coal seam gas fields. These produce dry gas with no oil at all. So the gas needs to carry 100% of the costs associated with exploration, development, and distribution. The result is gas that is more expensive to bring to market. Furthermore, export orders provided the basis for the business case. Gas exports from Queensland have unlocked the huge resource held within Queensland coal seams, a resource that would have stayed in the ground were it not for the economies of scale provided by the export industry. Without exports, $200 billion worth of investment by gas companies would never have happened. Without exports, Australia would be relying on imports despite having huge gas resources in the ground. And without exports, Australian consumers would be paying far more than they do today to cover the costs of exploration, development, and distribution. So to the second factor affecting investment decisions, political tensions. Political tensions are reaching a peak again, with a federal election due before long. Energy and climate policies remain battlegrounds for the hearts and minds of voters. We've all seen how difficult it is for all parties, irrespective of their ideology, to explain and sell these policies to political opponents or disenchanted voters. In the time since World War II, up to the defeat of John Howard in 2007, Australia had 11 Prime Ministers. Since 2007, Australia has had 6, 5 of which have lost their tenure in one way or another over climate and energy policy. Across the Western world, mainstream political parties are struggling to maintain traction and voter respect. Majority governments are increasingly hard to form as disenchanted voters opt for micro-parties. All of us here today should be concerned about this, as our resource projects span several terms of government, and the last thing our industry needs is policy backflips or turmoil. The forthcoming election should signal to the legislators and policymakers what Australians want: cross-party agreement on energy and climate policies. So after economics and politics, the third factor affecting investment decisions are the societal tensions. As I mentioned, our ambition is to be recognised as a strong social licence to operate. The public acceptance of what we do and what we'd like to do is clearly influenced by a myriad of factors. Humans tend to act in self-interest. Things that threaten our economic survival tend to be strongly resisted. And people who feel economically marginalised look to things to blame for their predicament. We've all seen how the Paris Yellow Vest movement grew from a protest against environmental fuel tax into a full-on street riots aimed at the French government. And you may recall, in stark contrast, we had placard-waving schoolchildren on strike across Australia demanding more action on climate change. It was even more telling that when the French government backpedalled, the rioting in Paris continued and threatened to descend further. At risk is social cohesion. So social cohesion is something that has always been robust in Australia, but now looks more fragile than it has ever been since the Vietnam War moratoriums. The divide between the haves and the have-nots is deepening. Often that manifests in a suspicion and loathing of government, immigrants and foreigners, as well as open class resentments and divides along political alignments. A common sentiment is that policymakers and elites have, in the eyes of the protesters, lost touch with ordinary folk. Big business is not blameless here either. The erosion of public trust in business mirrors the erosion of trust in political parties and religious institutions, and it's well documented, not the least of which in findings of recent Royal Commissions of Inquiry. The levels of executive remuneration now regularly draw strikes from shareholders at AGMs, especially at a time of flat wage growth for everyone else. The amount of taxes companies pay has never been more publicly scrutinised. I'm proud to say that the resources and energy industries are better at most when it comes to spreading the prosperity with communities. I can't overstate the importance of the industry's investment in regional and Indigenous Australia. Investments in the Queensland LNG sector, for example, has breathed life into a regional economy, delivering well-paid jobs and a separate investment cycle that acts as a hedge in economies reliant on income from single agricultural commodities. The Queensland LNG investments created 40,000 jobs during construction and an ongoing employment for 13,000 jobs. Resource projects bring prosperity to regional Australia. Resource projects bring training, high-skilled and well-paid jobs. And resource projects provide a rewarding future for young people in towns. As these skilled workers contribute to these productive economic areas, their labour will fuel both higher wages and further investment, ultimately leading to more and higher paying jobs. As we heard in this very room in December of last year, wages in the resources industry are the highest of all Australian industries. Australian Resources Minister pointed out that resource workers can earn more than double the average wage. But we must do a better job of telling this regional development story. Failure to do so will simply arm the naysayers in capital city cafes. There are, of course, a range of loosely to highly organised activists who want to close the fossil fuel industry down, irrespective of how strictly it adheres to environmental standards, irrespective of the employment it brings to regional Australia, and irrespective of how necessary its products are to everyday life for transport, heating, building materials, agriculture and manufacturing. The point is, we need more and cleaner energy solutions developed, not fewer. The industry needs more investment decisions to ready the supply, reliability and affordability for energy for the future. More investment, not less. To do this, we need to do one thing exceptionally well, and this is the challenge I'd like to leave you with today. The industry needs to advocate for pro-investment policies in a united way. We must be consistent, we must be united, and we must fight for the investment climate we know we need. We need to garner the support of our politicians so they understand what we need from government. We need to explain to our customers we're doing everything we can to ensure continued energy that is reliable and affordable. We need to win the public's support so they understand that we're conducting our business ethically and for public good. As an industry, there are three critical fronts we should be advocating strongly on. Let's deal perhaps with the thorniest first: climate and energy policy. Yes, it may be a political third rail, yet it still needs to be confronted. The recent IPCC report provided dire warnings about what a 1.5 degree rise in global temperature does to ecosystems and reefs. And remember, this is within the aims of the Paris Agreement to restrict warming to well under 2 degrees. So as business leaders, we must maturely look at what we can individually and collectively do to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and devise and explain we are to produce more and cleaner energy that customers are able to pay for. If we take the lead on suggesting approaches to this complex issue, it'll send a strong signal to government on how to proceed. As an industry, we should encourage the next government, no matter what their political persuasion, to introduce policies that encourage businesses to invest in solutions required. Part of the role for government will be to encourage consumers and businesses into lower carbon choices. But we're the ones who will need to advocate in a united way for parties to take a politically durable, bipartisan approach. A united advocacy can send strong signals for policy direction to provide investors with comfort and security. The second front for industry advocacy is wages growth. Stagnant wage growth is a fundamental issue to the ongoing national prosperity. The statistics are compelling. After a period of high growth leading up to 2013, wages have stagnated across the economy. While there has been much discussion on the best remedy to this stagnation, it strikes me that, at least in theory, the answer could be quite simple. Wages, like most costs, are a function of supply and demand. Stagnant wages are the product of easing jobs growth at a time of similar growth in population. So if we want to grow wages, we must grow the economy and the number of jobs, which in turn will increase competition for the most productive workers. Productivity is about working smarter. It's about business investing in skills and training and technology. And it's about managing growth and the opportunity for Australian enterprises and Australian workers. And the third front for pro-investment advocacy should highlight the benefits of free trade and open markets. We must remind governments and the public that economies that turn inwards miss out on the benefits that come with entry to huge world markets. We must remind people of countries' export success stories and how much the goods and resources exports have created the prosperity in regional Australia. We must point out how damaging it is for tit-to-tat tariffs and how trade sanctions can escalate. We've got to let the markets function. I'd also add here too, the artificial restrictions on access to resources for political reasons, like we do see here in onshore development in Victoria, ultimately hurt all Victorians by reducing energy security and reducing cost competitiveness. To summarise, the challenge for industry is to advocate that Australia needs policy that continues to attract investment opportunities. This will help grow local economies to demonstrate to detractors in capital cities the essential role that regions play. To underline the importance of this, it's useful to ask, what would things look like if we don't do this? What if we aren't a world-class investment destination? What if we don't help regional economies? And what if we don't invest now for more and cleaner energy solutions? The answer is we risk the possibility of rewriting the chapter on the past 30 years in Australia. We absolutely must ensure we're not the first generation since World War II to pass on to our children a lower standard of living than what we have enjoyed. We want our future generations not only to survive, but to thrive. Thank you.
Great, Zoe. Members and guests, as you know, we're now in a position to take questions from the floor. If you are asking a question, could you please wait for the microphone and state your name and affiliation? We've got Sam Street up here and Janani Mohan up here. So I think, Sam, you've got a question here, correct? Yes, please. Thanks.
Zoe, Hedley Widdop from Lion Selection Group right here in Melbourne. Thank you very much for that discussion. I sense from what you've talked about there that perhaps Shell feels there's been a deterioration in some of the conditions, maybe social in particular, that enable Shell to really achieve its core values there, particularly achieving its social licence to operate. Can you comment on, you gave a few global examples but are focused on Australia. Can you comment on how you see Australia in a global sense from a sovereign risk rating, but particularly with respect to those wages and social conditions, and how that poses challenges to your business cases for existing and ongoing business? And I'll offer you a further 4 cents a litre discount if you can add to that. The jurisdictions where you feel that Shell can really gel with the people that it's working amongst to achieve its social licence to operate. I mean, people often talk about the challenges to it, but I'm interested in the jurisdictions that you see as most welcoming from that point of view.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your question. Firstly, maybe I should just context how Australia features within the global portfolio of capital in Shell. So many of you may not be aware, but Australia hosts 50% of Shell's global integrated gas capital. So I think what I start with is a historical reference to our ability to drive competitive investment cases that have allowed Australia to prosper from significant investment over the past decade. So I think for us what we're looking for is making sure that that investment climate, those decisions, allow us to propagate. Most people here would probably appreciate that once you develop significant plants within Australia, so the liquefied natural gas plants, the ongoing investment in backfill opportunities to bring on the next reservoir that allow you to keep your plants at capacity is significant, and in fact features at numbers which are comparable to the second largest industry in Australia. So we know we need to continue to ensure that we have those stable, forward-looking policies that allow us to continue that investment in backfill assets and operations. The one thing I guess I would say is that we're always incredibly hesitant for anything that's done retroactively. So of course we continue to advocate that if there's a need for there to be changes, that we continue to make investment decisions without the concern that after we make those investment decisions we'll start to see policies change or be modified. Maybe just one more comment just in terms of the global context. We still see Australia, despite the challenges that I think we see here locally, as an incredibly attractive destination. We have an incredibly well-resourced staff opportunity. We've got a critical mass in Australia where we believe we really have the potential to invest significantly further. So I think for us it's really about making sure that those investment policies continue to give us the right conditions to continue to invest.
Zoe, over to your left, Janani. Janani? Yep.
Hi Zoe, my name's Cassandra and I'm one of the lucky students here today from RMIT. Shelley's one of Queensland's biggest gas producers and you've just started a gas trading business in Victoria. What is your opinion of plans to introduce LNG imports into Victoria? Is it something you think will work or something that you are studying yourself?
Yeah, great question. We get asked this certainly quite a lot. Firstly, I think it's important when you look at the AEMO modelling, which is the independent sort of energy market operator, which looks at whether there's the available gas that can meet the demands of domestic market whilst we continue to meet our export requirements. And so we do see in the foreseeable future that there is enough gas to meet local demands. That said, the picture does get quite tight. And so we can see that there will be a role for an LNG import terminal, perhaps for a short period of time, whilst we bring on the next phase of investment behind the ones that are currently in operation. So I think principally our preference is always to try and seek opportunities to create supply closest to the demand hubs, and hence our desire to really look for where we can find things like the Santos Narrabri development in New South Wales to provide 50% of the New South Wales demand. Those sorts of opportunities will relieve an enormous pressure into the domestic system, but can equally make sure that we unlock the resources and the broader benefits that you get from development in Australia rather than an import terminal in isolation.
Two more questions, I think, ladies and gentlemen. One here and then the last one there. So over here, Sam.
Adrian Prendergast from Morgans Financial. Thanks for your dynamic and far-reaching presentation, Zoe. Just maybe focusing on the technological and economic side of what Shell's achieved here in Australia and looking at, as you say, the engineering marvel that is Prelude or has delivered Prelude. How far down that path do you think we are as an industry in LNG in terms of being able to lower capital intensity further to deliver new greenfield projects like Prelude?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Adrian. We're actually seeing, and I think the moment of change probably dates back to the drop in the oil price in about 2014. But internally, we've done a significant amount of work around our both projects and our technology portfolios to see how we can really improve capital intensity of future projects. We're starting to see, and we've got a recent example in deep water off the Gulf of Mexico, where we're seeing what we call a competitive scoping environment, delivering projects at sort of a 40% of the original capital costs that might have been seen just perhaps 5 years earlier. Now, an aspect of that is probably market related in terms of the heat has come out of the contracting market, but equally it's about making sure that we're really clear about the scope that we're prosecuting and making sure that we're not putting in too much bells and whistles, I guess you might argue, for things that we haven't historically found valuable in operations or in use. So I think Prelude, of course, was probably one of the last projects that came through the system at the back end of the higher oil prices. So I think what we'll start to see is some of the technological innovations that we have experienced in Prelude being deployed in a number of places across the world. I think there's still more opportunity for us to do more of that. And I think you'll start to see in our backfield fields a significant opportunity to try and take advantage of better market and scoping conditions.
question, Zoe.
Zoe, thank you very much. Michael Beer is my name. Beer & Co is my company. You carefully mentioned, and thank you for doing so, talked about government maybe doing more in onshore Victoria in terms of opening up the place, and so the word fracking has to be brought up. Everyone knows that there is a massive amount of onshore gas in Victoria. The Labor government's had a moratorium which is ongoing for some time to come. Do you think your industry is capable of fracking safely in Victoria?
Yeah, I do. Of course, I spend a lot of time in my capacity of chair in the Association for Petroleum and Exploration. And I think the industry has proven in examples such as Queensland how it can coexist in a way that delivers significant regional developments in world-class safety and environmental performance, which allows both the economic stimulation as well as the careful nurturing of the environment for which we're operating in. Of course, every project does need to be evaluated on its own merits, and so I think in each jurisdiction where we see those moratoriums, I think it's really important that we really understand the facts and cases and make sure we work with the people of that local region to understand how we can coexist. Undoubtedly, I think if we look at Queensland, we've seen an enormous maturity as we've come through the learning curve. And so I think Queensland is a wonderful example, and certainly encourage those in Victoria who are looking at moratoriums or looking at conditions to operate with industry to come and tour some of the facilities in Queensland and see how you really can see the best of both worlds.
Thanks, Zoe. Just for a second, cover off. Well, that's the Q&A, members and guests. Normally, the honour of proposing the vote of thanks goes to one of our principal sponsors, and it was to be John Tivy from White & Case, but John has graciously invited the chairman of the Melbourne Mining Club, Richard Morrow, to join us on stage today to propose the vote of thanks to Zoe. So, Richard, would you please join me?
Thank you, and thank you, Gavin, and thanks to White & Case for inviting me as chair of the Melbourne Mining Club to give the vote of thanks, and hopefully I'm up to it. Zoe, you spoke today with great insight and consideration. You spoke directly of performance, passion and persistence. You focused on economic, political and social tension leading into social cohesion. So you reminded us that we're a nation built on exports and open markets, that the cheap gas is gone, or almost gone, and that our resource industry needs to advocate for pro-investment policies in a united way. And if we want to grow wages, we must grow the economy and the number of jobs. You have left us with a message that Australia needs policy that continues to attract investment opportunities. And may I say, you're also a great role model for all the young people in this audience here today. So, Melbourne Mining Club, its sponsors, its members and guests, thank you for today, your time today. Members and guests, please join me in thanking Zoe and Shell for your address today. Thank you very much. And now a little memento of your speech here today, and if I could ask you to open it as well.
I have my team here in the audience, so just so you know. Thanks,
Zoe. Thank you very much.